One of the key attack lines at last night's Republican National Convention was on the supposed intolerant climate affecting freedom of speech in the country today. But the simmering debate about so-called cancel culture goes beyond politics, and a recent letter in Harper's Magazine that drew national attention shows how blurry the battle lines are. Jeffrey Brown has our look for our ongoing arts and culture series, Canvas.
Joe Biden and the radical left are now coming for our freedom of speech.
It was one theme of opening night at the Republican convention, with speakers decrying a so-called cancel culture on the left that targets any but the most progressive views.
Do you support the cancel culture? Do you think America is to blame?
But in a strange twist in our strange political season, opponents of the president, people who would disavow anything heard last night, are having their own debate over speech. That heated up after recent publication of an open letter in Harper's Magazine, charging that demands for, quote, ideological conformity have led to an intolerant climate that has set in on all sides. Writer Thomas Chatterton Williams helped lead the effort and co-wrote the letter.
It's a climate that has been in the cultural and media landscape that myself and some of the other original drafters of the document work in, kind of censoriousness and a feeling that one has to be very careful about what one says or even thinks, because there's the risk of whipping up a kind of unforeseen storm of backlash.
One reason the letter got so much attention, the star power of its 150 writers, artists, journalists, and academic co-signers. They see a rush to judgment atmosphere unfolding mostly on social media. The result, they write, has been to steadily narrow the boundaries of what can be said without the threat of reprisal.
What happens is that somebody trips over a new norm that's not yet on the books, that is identified and called out, and then it whips up a kind of collective response, usually on social media, that burns like a raging fire very fast and quick and intensely, and that fire reaches the person's employer. And what happens is that the fire is not satisfied until the person loses their job.
The Harper's letter did not use the term cancel culture, but many others do. The idea that a given writer or other figure, having committed a perceived transgression in their work, is canceled, their views no longer acceptable, in some cases their livelihoods lost. Williams cites Colin Kaepernick, the NFL quarterback who kneeled during the national anthem, was blasted by President Trump and others, and subsequently lost his job, as an example of canceling by the right. But he also cites the case of David Shore, a data journalist who shared controversial but peer-reviewed research on protests and their impacts on elections, was then blasted on Twitter for seeming to suggest a backlash to protests would help re-elect Donald Trump, and later fired from his job. Another case, the resignation of the leadership of the Poetry Foundation after what many on Twitter found a too tepid response to the Black Lives Matter protests. Examples, among others, he says, of demands for ideological conformity and canceling on the left.
So what we're trying to do is carve out a space for free thought and free expression that resists both of these extremes.
But the Harper's letter itself met with scathing and bitter responses. Many, including Gabe Schneider, a journalist with the web-based MinnPost and co-founder of the media collective The Objective, see something very different and more positive in the culture.
Twitter has sort of opened up the floodgates to a variety of more voices. There is no publisher or editor saying you can or can't say that publicly. And the way that it's uplifted is not by being in the opinion pages of the New York Times, but by other people saying, you know, I agree with this opinion, I'm going to uplift it. And so I think it's created a culture where there's actually more speech, not less speech.
Schneider helped organize and write a response to the Harper's letter, criticizing its lack of specifics and the powerful editorial positions of its signatories. The irony of the piece, it says, is that nowhere do the signatories mention how marginalized voices have been silenced for generations in journalism, academia, and publishing. The content of the letter also does not deal with the problem of power, who has it and who does not.
The letter fundamentally misunderstands that this has been a problem for much longer than it presents, and not a problem in the way that it presents, right? It's not necessarily that cancel culture is a whole new thing. Black, brown, and trans voices have been left out of newsrooms and publishing and academia. They've been censored by their newsrooms. They've been told, you can't cover this. I personally think cancel culture has been, for the most part, powerful media, members of the media, celebrities, and academics being told by some of their prior fans and colleagues that they don't like them anymore.
That goes to another criticism of the Harper's letter aimed at some of its signers, including Harry Potter author J.K. Rowling, beloved by millions, but also under fire for comments she's made that were seen as anti-transgender.
Quite frankly, some of the signatories are bigoted, are bigots. And so to me, it's very easy to see why folks would be angry.
I asked Williams if he regretted including any of the signers.
I have no regrets of anybody being on the list. I really don't think that anybody that signed our letter is a bigot. In fact, I think everybody is committed to liberal values.
In the meantime, while opponents of Donald Trump continue their debate, the president and his allies hammer away.
We don't give in to cancel culture.
Like so much in American political discourse today, the terms themselves are used in different ways for different audiences to very different ends. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Jeffrey Brown.